Wild boars are becoming increasingly fierce and stubborn. With their sharp tusks, these beasts ravage the land, destroying the crops that farmers have tended with sweat and toil. They hide deep within the forest, daring any pursuers to follow. But who will stop these monsters? It's us, the hunters brave enough to face danger. One careless moment, and you could pay the price. How will this hunt end? Do you have the courage to follow me and take down the prey? Fully armed, we were ready to venture deep into the forest. The cunning beasts never reveal themselves in predictable ways, but we were prepared to face them, even in the darkness of the jungle. We began tracking the wild boar's trail. While carefully scanning every bush, trying to determine the direction of the prey, suddenly a wild boar dashed across our line of sight. Without hesitation, I raised my rifle, took aim, and adjusted to its running path. The gunshot echoed. The bullet hit its mark. The boar collapsed to the ground, not even taking another step. We quickly moved to another spot, where the sound of rustling had just come from deep within the thick bushes. Right at that moment, a panicked wild boar burst out of the undergrowth. I immediately raised my rifle, aimed straight at its body, and pulled the trigger without delay. The bullet shot out, slamming directly into the beast. It stumbled, then collapsed to the ground. We continued moving, following the remaining tracks of the wild boars. Suddenly, a panicked boar charged straight toward me. I instantly raised my rifle, aiming along its path of movement. When it was just a few meters away, I pulled the trigger. The first shot hit its leg, causing it to stumble, but it still tried to flee. I wasn't about to let it escape. I fired a second shot. The gun cracked through the forest, and this time, the boar collapsed completely, with no chance of getting up. The loud barking of the hunting dogs echoed, and I immediately moved toward the source. As I got closer, I could clearly hear the cries of a wild boar coming from inside the dense bushes. I gripped my rifle tightly, ready for a confrontation. A dark shape flickered behind the foliage the leader of the herd had just appeared. Without hesitation, I raised my gun, aimed directly at it, and pulled the trigger. It collapsed instantly. The entire herd panicked and scattered in all directions. I quickly turned, fired at another one, and dropped it on the spot. Not letting the chance slip away, I aimed at the fleeing ones and squeezed the trigger 2 more times, but both shots missed. It had already run too fast. Suddenly, one of them darted between the trees, sprinting fast through the forest. I immediately raised my rifle, chambered round, steadied my stance, and took careful aim. As it came closer, I pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the forest. The boar was hit and dropped to the ground instantly, with no chance to escape. We picked up the pace, determined to take down the remaining wild boars. The hunt had to end soon before night swallowed everything. The moment I caught sight of a silhouette ahead, I immediately took cover, gripped my rifle tightly, eyes locked on the target, waiting for the perfect moment as it ran past. I raised the gun, pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the boar square in the body, dropping it on the spot. This hunt, we claimed victory protecting the land and crops from the destruction of the wild boars. But for hunters like us, the story never ends there.
Recently, locals in the area had begun to notice the familiar signs of wild boar appearing more frequently along the slopes behind the village. We decided to head up the mountain early, hoping to get a head start before the boars moved further down the slopes. The slopes were steep and slippery, making for difficult travel. But if we could follow their usual paths, our chances of encountering them would be much higher. We parked by a narrow trail at the base of the mountain. Rifles had just been slung over our shoulders, and the group was ready to hike along the steep slope to reach our ambush point. No one expected things to kick off this early. Hank gripped his rifle tightly, cautiously approaching a small mound near the roadside. From its hiding spot, a wild boar suddenly burst out. Without hesitation, a sharp, decisive gunshot rang out. Just seconds later, the first target had collapsed. The hunt hadn't even officially begun, but the boars had already offered themselves up to the barrel. It took the team about 30 minutes to reach the ambush site we had scouted earlier. The top of the slope was clear, but below, dense brush covered the foothills, and that was our target area, the area I couldn't take my eyes off. A wild boar dodged Eric's shot and darted into the bushes. A few seconds later, it appeared on the other side, exactly as predicted. I held my breath, my finger tightening on the trigger. A deafening explosion tore through the air. The target had no chance of escape. Eric shifted his line of sight and quickly spotted a herd of wild boars moving up the slope. Without hesitation, he raised his rifle, waited for the perfect moment as one of the boars entered a clearing and fired. A single shot hit. One boar rolled down the hill, while the rest immediately bolted in panic. Still, we had secured the prize we came for. At a higher ambush point, Hank also spotted a boar just as it emerged from a dense thicket. He didn't hesitate for even a second. A direct shot from the front brought the wild boar down instantly, and it tumbled into the green brush nearby. In mountainous slope areas like this, wild boars often choose paths covered with thick vegetation to move and forage. So, if you catch the wind direction and set up at the right spot, the chances of a successful ambush are quite high. Only were there hunters positioned above, there was also someone stationed down in the valley. Travis received a report from the scout team. A wild boar had been wounded and was trying to hide in the bushes. Not giving a chance to escape, Travis immediately moved in on the target. The boar no longer had the strength to fight back, so all Travis had to do was fire a decisive shot to finish it off completely. During our hunts along the mountainside, we usually retreat early from the peak and switch to ambushing in nearby areas. I was assigned to hold position at the foot of the mountain, a narrow trail between the low valley and the slope, which also happens to be a common path for wildlife movement. Sure enough, not long after, rustling came from the nearby brush and a dark figure appeared. I reacted quickly, adjusted my aim, and pulled the trigger. A single, clean, and precise shot. The boar collapsed by the roadside, struggled briefly, then lay still.
¿Qué hablo, Mimi? Traía a jugar menos, me hago una que yo piña.
An open field in Florida with no bushes to hide behind, no way out. A hail of bullets sweeps across, and the wild boars flee. But this time, they're not easy targets. When pushed to the edge, will wild boars run or go mad and charge into a deadly fight? And if a 300-pound one turns back to attack, will the shooter be fast enough to pull the trigger? Or is he the one being hunted? The wild boars stormed across the field like a surge of fury. They tore through rows of soil, snapped corn stalks, and trampled patches of crops nearing harvest. Nothing could stop them. Iron fences were bent, water tanks overturned, entire irrigation systems shattered. They didn't destroy to survive. They destroyed out of brutal instinct. Each step they took shredded more land, crushed more property into the mud. This was no longer mere damage. This was a declaration of war. The boars hid silently in the field, as if nothing were there. But the harvester was merciless. Wherever it went, their hiding places disappeared. Panic set in. With no place to hide, the boars rushed towards the bushes at the edge of the field, thinking that was where they could escape. But the gunman was waiting. No rush, no confusion. Just a glance, a quick shot following their path. The shot tore through the air. One fell to the ground without a sound. The hunt began. The vineyard in front was left with only dry stumps and patches of scattered grass. As soon as I stepped forward, the hunting dogs barked fiercely. Without thinking, I rushed toward the sound. And just as I had sensed, the wild boar suddenly leapt out. There was no time to hesitate. I raised my gun and pulled the trigger. Boom! One shot was enough. It collapsed, motionless. A clean in, no chance for a second time. Suddenly, a wild boar burst out of the field, panicked by the barking. The moment I caught sight of it, I raised my gun, aimed directly, and pulled the trigger repeatedly. But this one was tough. It weaved through and escaped out of sight. I didn't hesitate. I ran around to the hidden side. Just as I arrived, I saw it trying to turn back and I raised my gun without a second thought. It collapsed right at the edge of the field, not getting a chance to turn back. We moved to the next location, an endless green field. We sped up on our motorbikes. Suddenly, I spotted a dark shadow in the distance, a wild boar quietly creeping in to cause destruction. Without saying a word, my teammate immediately swerved and charged forward. As soon as the engine roared, it panicked and fled. The chase began. I aimed and pulled the trigger. First shot, missed. Second shot, still missed. Third shot wasn't any better, but we didn't stop. When we got close, just a few meters away, I raised my gun one more time. This time, no mistakes. One shot clean hit. The beast collapsed right on its escape path. We returned to the cornfield, this time with our familiar allies, the hunting dogs. They spread out in all directions, sniffing every trace. In less than 5 minutes, loud barking erupted at the edge of the field. I immediately rushed over, gripping my gun tightly. As I approached the edge, I stopped and aimed toward the source of the noise. The sky was gradually getting dark, but I still hadn't stopped. Alone, I followed along the edge of the field, looking to see if any wild boar were left. Suddenly, I spotted the direction a boar was running. Without hesitation, I immediately picked up speed and moved to cut it off. It was about to dash into the neighboring field, but at that very moment, I had already raised my gun. One shot, precise. The boar collapsed on the spot, without making a sound. Hunting is not just a passion. It helps protect crops, livestock, and the very survival of boars. Each boar taken down is one less threat.
Good anytime.
My grandparents' farm has suffered repeated damage from wild boars, with the crops taking heavy losses. Now that they've grown old and can no longer guard the land like they used to, that piece of land has become more vulnerable than ever. That's why my cousin Magnus and I decided to head out to go on a hunting trip to protect our beloved family farm. We started moving into the swampy area right next to the farm around 4 p.m., just as the wild boars began foraging. The feed we had scattered earlier had started to do its job, quickly attracting one of the boars. I climbed up a tall tree branch, hiding behind the thick branches. From up here, I had the perfect shooting. Slowly, I raised my gun and aimed at the target. Bang! Got it. I exhaled, heart still racing with excitement. A precise shot, fast and clean, instantly brought down the boar. After that first success, I moved to a new ambush spot. We stuck to our previous strategy, laying down bait to lure the boars.
Dropped him.
I waited for about 20 minutes before a group finally showed up. Oh, not very big in size, but there were quite a few of them. I adjusted my scope. The target this time was the one on the outer edge. Once I was sure it was within my sights, I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the swamp. Another precise hit. Another win on our mission to track down these wild intruders. My friend Magnus wasn't far off. He had just spotted a new target and was preparing to shoot. The animal kept moving, so Magnus had to be patient, waiting for the perfect moment. Once it stepped into a vulnerable position, a pellet from his air rifle struck it down instantly. In under 5 seconds, the boar collapsed before it could even let out a cry. Unlike previous hunts, on these 2 afternoons we chose to ambush from the treetops. The height gave us better visibility, made us harder to detect, and offered more safety. But it also came with risks. A single misstep could lead to a fall, so every movement had to be made with care. When the boars appeared, my heart started pounding. I locked onto my target and pulled the trigger. Got it. I couldn't hide my joy seeing the boar drop instantly. A fatal shot had immobilized it completely. That thrill, it felt like every effort we made had truly paid off. Boars are naturally cautious creatures, but the irresistible scent of bait drew them closer, unaware they were being watched. Seizing the chance, Magnus raised his rifle and took aim. The moment the target was centered in the scope, the shot rang out. It wasn't loud, but it was deadly. 2 boars dropped on the spot. Wow, perfect, powerful shots. A performance any hunter would admire. Our previous location had been exposed, so I had no choice but to quickly relocate to a new ambush point. Before I could even get fully settled, a herd of boars suddenly appeared. A big mistake on their part, but a golden opportunity for us. I swiftly took aim, locked onto the target, and pulled the trigger. The sharp crack of the rifle rang out. A clean, decisive shot ended the boar's life in an instant. Satisfaction washed over me. A well-earned reward for the focus and patience that had carried me. The night before the hunt, we sat beside a small fire inside a rickety wooden shack on the edge of the forest. News about wild boars tearing through the villagers' crops had been growing more frequent. Those animals were becoming bolder, more cunning. That was why we made the decision to leave the safety behind, bringing our rifles, supplies, and a sharpened sense of caution, stepping into a hunt that promised danger at every turn. Like always, we started by carefully surveying the terrain. This time, the forest's edge, the fragile boundary between open land and dense woods, was the spot we chose for the ambush. I stood just outside, eyes locked onto the dense wall of trees ahead. Early morning is still prime feeding time for boars, so it didn't take long before a large, dark-colored male appeared. It had no idea it was being watched. Step by step, it moved closer, completely unaware like it owned the place. Then again, I had been sitting dead still for nearly 30 minutes, like part of the landscape. I gripped my rifle tight and aimed just behind its front shoulder. One deep breath, finger on the trigger. The boar dropped almost instantly. That shot was a kill shot, maybe heart, maybe lungs, I couldn't say for sure. But I knew it didn't feel pain for long. Moving closer, I crouched behind a bush near the forest edge. Good cover, good view, but the downside was shifting winds and sharper ears for the boars. Even with a group right in front of me, I didn't dare make a sudden move. Finger resting gently on the trigger. Boom! One down, the rest scattered. That's fine. I'll be seeing them again deep in the woods. We pushed deeper into the forest. Not even 5 minutes in, boom, a whole herd of wild boars suddenly appeared. They were too fast. The angle was bad. After a few missed shots, we gave up the chase. Deeper still, the vibe was now a mix of excitement and tension. As I waited behind a tree, another boar showed up about 30 feet away. No time to think. I raised the gun and fired. Quick and clean. Another one down. Still moving. Still searching. Then I heard the hunting dogs barking like crazy not far off. I followed the noise and came to a narrow game trail, thick bushes on both sides. The boar could charge out from anywhere, any direction. I stayed sharp. But wait, not that way. Something, maybe sound, maybe instinct, made me spin around fast. Rifle up. Seconds later, it showed up. One clean shot, right on cue. The boar dropped in the middle of the trail, motionless. Was it skill? Instinct? I don't know. Maybe both. But I do know that one tiny rustle saved the moment. And believe it or not, I ran into another group of wild boars. The adrenaline had barely left my system from earlier, and now it hit me all over again. I only had a few seconds to fire before they shifted direction and vanished. I managed to hit at least one. Not the best outcome, but far from the worst. I was standing near the roadside, eyes locked on the trail ahead where the boars were darting across. A few shots rang out,